For our first session of day two, I'm pleased to welcome Laurel Ann Stark to our virtual stage. Laurel is the CEO and founder of Resurgo.co, the only web app designed to support self-employed women to succeed. She is a passionate mental health advocate who is now striving to take action in order to address the mental health crisis plaguing the world's innovators. Thank you for joining us today, Laurel. I will now pass the virtual mic over to you.
Thank you so much, Jessica, and thanks every single woman who has taken the time for themselves to join this presentation today. The topic of today's presentation is the Busy Woman's Guide to Better Mental Health, and we're going to cover how to create space in an already full schedule. Thank you again so much for joining. Our agenda is threefold today. First, we will identify surprising factors that impact our mental health. From there, we're going to discuss how to feel better without doing more. And third, ways to reframe our thinking that actually make a real difference in the way that we feel. So my name is Laurel Ann Stark. Thank you, Jessica, for the wonderful introduction. I'm the founder of Resurgo.co, a business and marketing consultant, and a mental health advocate. But what's not on my LinkedIn profile is bankruptcy, alcoholism, burnout, divorce, being a survivor of abuse, complex PTSD, disordered eating, trying to be it all and do it all. I have been self-employed in technology for 18 years and my work has been featured worldwide. But one of the most difficult things is trying to balance personal life and business life for me. I'm sharing some of the images from my personal life here where I'm showing two of my stepkids as well as myself presenting at a large conference. And when these photos were taken, I was running my own business, seeking to fund, and keep myself self-employed without any support from the government or employees. I was a top-rated business and marketing consultant. I had a published book, and on social media, everything looked really good. Also, I had great wedding photos, and I was married with 3 stepchildren, which was pretty difficult with respect to a blended family, as well as having neurodiverse children, as well as a dog. So everything looked really good on social media. I was getting featured in the news, and my work was getting top accolades all over the world. But truthfully, I was really struggling. This photo here is of me doing a keynote speech to over 300 people at a conference. Again, everything looks fantastic, but in my personal life, I felt overwhelmed. I felt isolated. I honestly felt like I wasn't good enough. And I was regularly experiencing anxiety attacks, insomnia, and depression. And I felt like I was really alone, but I wasn't. So if this resonates with any of you ladies out there, the struggle to balance professional life with personal life, I want you to put a yes in the chat if you feel comfortable, just to show that we are not alone when we feel this way. If any of you have felt inadequate, especially lately, and especially when you're comparing yourself to other people on social media, if you feel comfortable, put a yes in the chat. Again, to show none of us are alone when we feel this way. If you feel like you need to try harder and do better, but you don't have the time or energy to allocate to giving more, again, I encourage you to put a yes in the chat. And I guarantee I would be putting a yes in the chat, except for that I'm presenting. So just a couple of housekeeping notes before I get into the body of the presentation. So first of all, I really encourage you to share on social media during and after the presentation to keep the conversation going. The hashtag we're using is when it all stacks up. Also, as I indicated just a second ago, please do engage in the chat if anything resonates with you. I want to hear about it. We love feedback. At the end, we will have a live question and answer period, and Jessica will be looking for your questions and flagging them, and we have just a brief period of time at the end of the presentation to answer your questions. And then I just have a brief content warning for you, where we will have a brief mention of pregnancy, failure, and termination, as well as domestic and sexualized violence. We're not going to get into the nitty-gritty, just going to be mentioning some statistics. And last but not least, if you would like to get a copy of this presentation, and I'll bring up this website at the end as well, you can go to resurgo.co/stacks. So if you're looking for, where did Laurel get this data from? Or what was that cool thing she said that really resonated? You don't have to take notes or anything. You can just be present with the presentation, and you can download this PowerPoint at any time you like, and you can keep it for life. So I'll bring up that website again at the end of the presentation. So I mentioned that I felt like I was really quite alone when I was going through all that mental health stuff. And I wanted to um, mention again that you are not alone. So that period in my life, I got really interested in mental health and what solutions were available specific for self-employed women. So that's been the focus of my career for the last 4 years. And in the fall of 2020, we did a poll of over 250 women, employed, self-employed, part-time working, stay-at-home moms, and basically women who are working in all types of different sectors. And we asked them how their mental health was doing. And honestly, the results were pretty crazy considering we weren't even halfway through the pandemic yet. 1 in 4 reported that their mental health was bad, either selecting poor or bad. 69%, 69% of our respondents indicated that they felt regularly overwhelmed. And of most concern, 22% of our respondents indicated feelings of that they wanted to escape life. So this is really concerning. This is, I think the data was a lot worse than I anticipated. So it was concerning on the one hand, and on the other hand, I was like, oh, I'm not alone actually. So in addition to this web hole with resurgio.co, we actually spent 4 years doing research on the obstacles in the way of self-employed women specifically, but we did a lot of digging into what are the obstacles in the way for just women in general succeeding in both life and in business. So we went in depth and analyzed over 200 different studies. We did our own research, a brief screenshot of which I just shared with you. And what this really did that was interesting is it really validated the experiences I was having personally, as well as the experiences I'd seen with the women I was mentoring, my colleagues, my friends, things like that. And I think that you'll find the same. So the first sort of meat and potatoes piece of this presentation is where we get into the environmental factors that are affecting our mental health that I know for myself, when I got into this research, I was really, really surprised at what was out there. So I hope that this is an informative piece of the presentation. It's broken up into 3 segments: biological, systemic, and working conditions. The biological factors that can affect your mental health, we're just going to start off with birth control because it's so common. What I didn't know and what the research shows is that just by simply taking birth control, it puts you at a higher risk of depression. That's actually a known side effect of taking hormonal birth control. So that would be things like the ring, the birth control pill, and anything that's hormonal. And in fact, if you've taken any hormonal birth control for up to 7 years, once you hit 7 years, you are at an increased risk of suicide. So that's deeply concerning. And I know for myself, I was, really, really shocked to become aware of this. And I don't think that enough people are aware that this is a very significant side effect on really, really commonly used medication. And when it comes to pregnancy loss, I don't think we hear about it as much as it happens necessarily, but a full 25% of pregnancies are not successful and end in failure. And this has a tremendous impact on mental health. Pregnancy loss can result in depression, increased odds of PTSD, mood disorders, obsessive compulsive disorder. And the more miscarriages that an individual has, the higher their likelihood of psychiatric issues. There's a very significant statistical correlation between pregnancy loss and mental health issues. And I don't think that we necessarily know about the correlation between them. And then very specifically with respect to terminated pregnancies or abortion, that puts you at an increased risk of potentially problematic substance usage. So that's another side effect of terminated pregnancy that just to be aware of. Then when it comes to postpartum, even if you have had a pregnancy that doesn't carry to full term, you can also be experiencing postpartum depression, which can actually last up to 2 years. And is characterized by major depressive episodes. So postpartum happens a lot more frequently than doctors are aware of, anywhere between 10 and 65%, depending on your cultural background and depending on a number of factors. But it's a very substantial amount of women experience postpartum, and it can dramatically affect you, again, up until 2 years after the pregnancy. And the last factor, I think we're all pretty familiar with how our period and menopause can affect our mental health, having had some experience with it at least. But what I found really interesting about this was that menstruation and menopause do create increased risk of anxiety, depression, eating disorders, which I didn't think about until I thought about how I sort of eat before and after my period, and also substance use. Um, Menopausal women actually have higher suicidal ideation as well. And my favorite part about this is in the fourth week of your cycle, or when you're actually menstruating, this is when there are higher rates of suicide as well as being committed to psychiatric units. So there's a definite statistical correlation between hormonal factors and mental health factors. And I don't know about you, but I have sort of brushed off the side effects of my period, and not been like, oh, it's not really all that bad, that sort of thing. And you know what? Sometimes it can be, and it's just really, really good to know that. So those are the biological factors that can affect mental health that maybe are surprising. I know that some of them surprised me. Next, we're going to look at the systemic factors that can affect your mental health. The first is medical bias. And again, I was stunned when I read this research. Historically, women's bodies have been proclaimed as everything from inadequate to unclean to unholy, and in short, deficient to men. Sounds really harsh. Even Aristotle, one of my favorite philosophers, said that woman is nothing but a mutilated male. Super harsh words. This legacy and this history of being treated as a lesser male has two really important side effects that we need to be aware of. The very first one is that we are internalized shame about our bodies and their natural processes. And the third one that I'm mentioning here today is medical bias. So out of 800 medical studies, only 23% of them were done on female bodies. So that's incredibly dangerous, especially when we look at the fact that some of these studies were done on medicine for women. Joan Borisenko, who is the author of a book I absolutely love called The Woman's Book of Life, mentioned in her book that she was researching the side effects of a hormone replacement therapy medicine, and her doctor assured her that there wasn't any. And she went on to do more research to find out that the clinical studies that had been done for that medicine actually only involved men. So medical bias and the sort of legacy of Western medicine as it relates to the female body means that we just know less about the female body. So we know less about what goes on, what can be correlated with mental health, and we can also be dismissed quite a lot when we're bringing medical issues to professionals. So that can create anxiety, obviously stress, etc. We can also be misdiagnosed more easily. There's more money spent on research for erectile dysfunction than for period disorders where there's tremendous pain. And this is actually incredibly impactful, not just for white women, but women of color, and specifically Black and Indigenous women. Medical bias has actually increased the rates of mortality for women giving birth in America by over 200%. And we do have a legacy here in Canada, up until recently, of forced sterilization of Indigenous women. So these are not just mental health, but physical health outcomes that are very common and still in practice today, and certainly are going to affect our mental health, especially if we're bringing issues to our doctors and feeling like we're not being taken seriously, or if we're taking medicine that has side effects that they don't know about on the female body. The second systemic factor is harassment. So 73% of women have been harassed online. And I don't know about you, but it can range from the, hello beautiful to pictures of genitalia. And from my experience with this specifically, is that it made it really difficult to engage in the online activities I needed to do for work, made me really anxious to log on to my devices. And then other side effects that other women have had, and the research shows sleep issues, muscle pain, depression, anxiety, harassment in the workplace can also lead to things like hair loss, heart problems, and PTSD. The rates of harassment in offices are about 50%, as the research shows, but doctors say that it's probably not accurate, as all the harassment isn't necessarily reported. So being harassed, whether it's online or offline, can be really, really bad for your mental health, and it is incredibly common. The pay gap. Okay, so the pay gap is 72 cents on the dollar here in Canada, and that has a bunch of different effects that can affect our mental health, or a bunch of different reasons that would affect our mental health. So This again is the legacy of our history in terms of not having gender equality. In the 1900s, women weren't allowed to own property. Only recently were we able to open bank accounts for our businesses. And there is an absolute correlation between lower income and mental health concerns. Indigenous, Black, disabled, and LGBTQ plus, pardon me, women all experience even bigger disparity between what a man gets paid for the same work and what a woman gets paid for the same work, up to about 50% less. So the pay gap, again, that direct correlation between lowered income and mental health concerns, and also a difficulty with respect to things like imposter syndrome and increased stress as a result of being concerned for being able to make ends meet. The last systemic issue I wanted to bring up that can affect your mental health that may be surprising to you is how common domestic violence is and gender-based violence. This is also going up since COVID started, and the side effects of violence against women can be incredibly, very, very intense. So here I'm categorizing both domestic violence and sexualized violence under the same boat, and the rate that United Nations says that women experience this globally is at about 70%. And also many of these cases aren't reported. There are much, much higher rates for Indigenous, Black, women of color. And the rates of, or the risk of developing depression, PTSD, or becoming suicidal is 3 to 5 times higher if you've experienced violence. And unfortunately, like I said, the rates are increasing during COVID. So those are the systemic issues that might be affecting mental health. Lastly, in the environmental factors that are affecting mental health, I want to discuss work-related factors, and then we're going to move on from all of these depressing statistics into the solution. So bear with me, we're almost done the kind of hard part. Okay, so workload. This, again, really, really shocked me in terms of how prevalent and how sort of bad this still is. Whether or not the woman is the breadwinner, women are still performing the majority of the domestic labor, and domestic labor is things like taking care of the house, the meals, the cooking, the cleaning, etc., but also care duties. So care duties are things like taking care of elders and children. So women on average in the Western world perform an average of 2.5 hours of free domestic labor per day. Long working hours are linked to diabetes, depression, and risky drinking, not to mention it's exhausting and stressful. This workload, this domestic labor has been coined the second shift. So after women finish their regular workday where they're earning 72 cents on the dollar, only if they're white, they then are coming home to a bunch of other domestic work of children and elders. And I think 2 pieces to this are really important. Number one, it's exhausting to work a lot. Obviously, stress is super bad for mental and physical health, but also the fact that it's sort of generally perceived that it isn't that bad anymore and that it's more equal than it actually is. That can create cognitive dissonance, which is also incredibly difficult mentally. With respect to workload, the second piece I wanted to speak about is the leadership deficit. So globally, women just fill just 29% of leadership seats worldwide, and they tend to not get that first promotion, even when they're performing at the same level of their male counterparts. So this can be directly correlated with things like imposter syndrome, feeling like no matter how many qualifications, how many degrees, how many certifications, how much education you have, that you're not good enough for the role, because when we compare the qualifications of men and women, even if women are more qualified, they are not getting the promotion, they are not in leadership seats. And this bias can be just really, really difficult, again, creating that cognitive dissonance where we're sort of told that things are equal, and maybe you work in a business that claims to have a performance-based culture or a meritocracy, and to see that people are being promoted even though they may not have the same qualifications, that can create a tremendous amount of stress, depression, fatigue, and anxiety as well. The third piece I wanted to speak about with respect to workload is what's known as beauty labor, or the third shift. So as far as women's appearance goes, as it relates to work, the notion of being professionally pretty and women's beauty standards as a requirement for employment has been enshrined in US law since 1971. So there are particular standards for women when it comes to what it takes to look professional. And the average woman spends an hour a day on beauty labor, or this third shift. And another study showed that women spend up to $250,000 over their lifetime on beauty labor, and with women deeming it being a necessary investment. So again, when we look at how this all sort of begins to stack up, if we are working more with respect to the second shift, domestic labor, adding beauty labor on top of that, looking at the pay gap, getting 72 cents on the dollar, and then the amount that we're spending on beauty labor, we start to see this pattern of being really under-resourced and overworked, which again can definitely impact your mental health. And then the last systemic piece is COVID, of course. The pandemic has been called the she session. It's completely impacted vulnerable communities more. And we have one fifth of women in the workforce have left since the pandemic started, which is a staggering number, and is due to the burden of educating children at home, as well as the prevalence of women in positions that have been deemed non-essential, and service positions that have been impacted by the recession as well. So those are some of the factors that are related to workload and fall under the category of systemic issues that can affect your mental health. So what I want to bring to your attention is that all these factors can stack up. Whether you're experiencing one, or you have experienced 1, 2, 3, or even 4, when we look at them all together, it can really drive home the point that, maybe 1 or 2 of these is sort of manageable and won't have that bad of an effect on your mental health. But most women I know are experiencing 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then they go home and they're really, really hard on themselves about why they can't do better, or why they have depression, or why they can't perform, or why they don't feel great that day, or why they ate a cheesecake for dinner. That wasn't me at all, I promise. But I think that this really recontextualizes the environmental factors that really do have an effect on us in a really powerful way. So now that we've gotten through some of these statistics, which again, I found really, really difficult to read, to verify were accurate, and to then reflect and realize how common they are in my life and in the lives of the women that I know, we're going to move on to the solution. Yay. Okay, so we are going to get into how to feel better without doing more. And it's really, really important for me to emphasize this piece about without doing more. As we look through the previous pieces of this presentation, I think it's fairly obvious to everyone that women are under-resourced and overworked. And the last thing I want to do is give you a big to-do list of things that you need to, improve in your life. As far as I'm concerned, we've all done enough. But these principles that I'm going to share with you today, I believe will enable us to feel better without doing more. The first principle is that we know the truth about our risk profile. So we can't accurately assess where we are now until we look at the historical and contextual factors that inform our gender. And just by knowing that we have suffered, incredible loss and trauma, it's really, really helpful in understanding where we are, knowing about the cumulative effect of all of these different factors. So in this case, 1 + 1 does not equal 2. Sometimes 1 factor plus 1 factor can end up equaling a mental health impact of 5, 6, or 7. Every individual is unique, and they can all stack up in a specific and different way. What's important to know here is that we are naming things, and we are understanding how these impact us on a personal level. Eve Ensler, the author of the Vagina Monologue, says, "I believe in the power and mystery of naming things. Language has the capacity to transform ourselves, rearrange our learning patterns of behavior, and redirect our thinking. I believe freedom begins with naming things. Humanity is preserved by it." I think that's just beautiful. But if we aren't necessarily naming things, and we don't necessarily are able to identify specifically how things have affected us, even just knowing the compound effect of some of these principles can certainly help explain a lot. At least it did for me. The second principle, I believe, allows us to feel better without doing more is understanding that we don't have to measure ourselves with a broken ruler. When we look at things just like the wage gap, the domestic labor, and the beauty labor that we're doing, these are facts. We have a higher workload and reduced resources. So the myths of the meritocracy suggest we all possess equal ability, and we have a level playing field in which we're working. We're sold on this idea that we can do it all and be it all and look great doing it. And if we don't, we're somehow a failure. And it's a reflection of a lack of ability on our part instead of a reflection of the fact that our system is broken when it comes to measuring women. And Amy Poehler says, it takes years as a woman to unlearn what you've been taught to be sorry about. Principle 3 is rejecting oppressive narratives. So, our predominant culture values things that may not resonate with us. We do live in a white heteronormative patriarchy. And I can't tell you how many times, as a professional woman in a professional setting, I've been asked when I'm going to get married, when I'm going to have babies, or things that are just, way too personal. There is, this huge pressure on women to look a particular way, to lose weight, etc. And all of this can be very, very oppressive, especially if it doesn't resonate with you necessarily. And I know for myself that some of the narratives that are sort of placed on me, I'm not interested in whatsoever. And I think that can be, very, very stressful, especially with respect to body image stuff. One thing that I ask myself that I found really, really helpful is who profits from my shame? Who profits from my dislike of myself? Who profits from my internalized oppression? And that really recontextualizes and reframes the thought for me. Principle 4 is being part of a supportive community like this one. It's certainly not enough to simply surround ourselves with people. There's a few things more depressing than being in a room and feeling alone. The ticket is having real human connection, things in common, shared experience, empathy, sympathy, understanding, requiring some level of vulnerability to get that connection. In my experience, it's critical to have at least one person in your life that you can tell the truth to, especially with respect to the pandemic. Women definitely feel isolation a lot more so than our male counterparts, and it's really critical to just lean in and seek connection wherever possible, and really value the connections that we do have. Principle 5, we define our success. Brene Brown says, shame for women is this web of unobtainable, conflicting, competing expectations about who we're supposed to be, and it's a straitjacket. So by defining our success ourselves, by looking at some of the pressures that are put on us and deciding whether we specifically reject or embrace the narratives that our culture gives us, we can then start to feel a lot better about what we have done. And honestly, through the pandemic, if you've taken a shower today, if you've made it through the day, you get to count that as a win. I think being able to reframe the way that we look at what our success is critical. Lowering our standards, having more compassion for ourselves, reducing our expectations of ourselves to be it all and do it all and look great doing it, I think has been critical for me, specifically in having better mental health. One quote I absolutely love is that you should make yourself so happy that when others look at you, they become happy too. That's Yogi Bhajan. It's a much better way to look at things than our culture that so praises self-sacrifice, especially when it comes to our work culture and our home culture. What if we put ourselves first? What could happen then? Principle 6 is that we reclaim our bodily autonomy. Sonia Renee Taylor is the author of a book called The Body is Not an Apology, The Power of Radical Self-Love. She defines the body shame profit complex. I love that. The body shame profit complex as a social, political, economic structure that profits from body terrorism, which we know mostly today as diet culture and Eurocentric beauty standards. We are influenced and advertised to and are shown that being skinny, white, and pleasant is the norm in our culture. And that if we go against that, we are pushing against cultural norms. And it can be incredibly stressful and incredibly difficult. So if it is safe, what I would be looking at is rejecting those narratives. Our women's bodies have been policed and have been made political, especially Black women. There's tons of stories out there about Black women not being able to wear their hair naturally in the workplace, and there being all kinds of rules and regulations about that, which is completely unfair. In 2016, I believe it was just outlawed in British Columbia, Canada, that employers couldn't require women to wear high heels at work. So there is so much that is legislated and regulated about our bodies that if we have the ability to sort of look at what we can control and refuse to allow ourselves to be regulated in our own minds, I believe that leads to a lot of freedom. Women are also very much encouraged to come across as pleasant. I don't know how many times I've been told to smile in my life by people that I either don't know or have no business talking to me about what my face looks like. The author Soraya Chemaly, who wrote the book Rage Becomes Her, The Power of Women's Anger, says that we violate social norms when we get angry. And certainly that's true, but perhaps we can do so when and where it feels safe, and reject, again, oppressive norms. Principle 7, she actively reclaims ancient skill sets. So Indigenous cultures in particular often frame humanity as being part of the natural world instead of above it. And there's a lot of ancient skill sets that were sacrificed and lost through colonization, through the oppression and femicide of women, etc. And often these skill sets and ways of looking at things are more holistic and emphasize an interconnected perspective. And by reclaiming ancient skill sets, just even as basic as measuring your menstrual cycle and tracking that can create such an increase in mental well-being. I don't get paid to say this, but any sort of app on your phone, I use the one called Flow, can be really, really powerful in helping explain things and inform expectations around how you're going to feel. It'll explain the 4 different parts of your cycle. And for me, I was like powerlifting on my period. I was trying to get my max deadlift weight on my period and wondering why I felt exhausted for 2 weeks later. And now I know that that's the week you're supposed to rest, and that your luteal phase is the best time to do powerlifting. It'll explain things like why, you're so great at public speaking one week and terrible the next. And you can plan your work. Well, I plan my work and life around it. And that's just, working with my flow as opposed to against it has been incredible when it comes to improving my mental health. Definitely would recommend that, or any other app on your phone to help just sort of work with your body instead of against it. Again, we have been taught that our menstrual cycles are dirty and unclean, and that there's shame associated with it, when in fact it's perfectly natural. And I think it's pretty incredible to be able to, period pains have been proven to be just as painful as a heart attack. And the fact that we can, just shoulder that and walk on is proof of how resilient we are, and not proof of how, gross we are. We prioritize taking exceptional care of ourselves. So again, these are exceptional times. And as I've demonstrated, women have an incredibly high workload, and we are incredibly under-resourced rather. So it can be very difficult in these times to take exceptional care of ourselves. A lot of the women that I work with tend to have issues or resistance, and I do as well, around saying no or taking time for ourselves, or doing anything that might make others uncomfortable. We are socialized to be accommodating. We are socialized to be caretakers. So it can be really, really difficult to sort of start to set boundaries and things like that. But one of the easiest ways that I found to start to carve out time for myself and to start prioritizing myself and my self-care is with respect to boundaries around my device. So screen time is absolutely correlated with mental health concerns, addictive and obsessive behavior, increased body dysmorphia, especially when it relates to social media and consuming images, especially of other women. Excuse me. The Snapchat filter is something that has been brought to the attention of plastic surgeons, and is an asked for feature and augmentation. So interacting with our devices is something that can be, they're powerful tools. They're incredible in terms of what they have the capacity to do for us, but they can also be really harmful as well. So I sort of view our devices as tools, like power tools. We want to use them properly, and if we don't, we can get hurt. So some boundaries around tech that are really helpful are setting screen time limits. And I know you've heard this all before, but I found that, taking 30 seconds to set up that timer on my iPhone that kicks me off Instagram at 11 o'clock at night has been really, really helpful for my mental health. Another thing is giving yourself and giving myself permission to simply not answer all messages, or block and delete people that are sending me offensive messages, or to schedule time to engage with my device and answer messages and not be available all the time, to actually take time and go offline if at all possible. Some other pieces that can be really helpful here is actually blocking, deleting, and unfollowing people that are not helpful for your mental health. I was following a bunch of fitness influencers there for a while, and then I did some self-reflection, and I realized that they were actually making me feel really, really bad about my body. And so I unfollowed them. And guess what? I feel better. I started following body positivity people, and that definitely had an impact on my mental health. And I never really thought about how such a simple sort of editing and curating my own feed could be so powerful in terms of impacting my mental health in that way. But it really, really does make a huge difference. Outside of our devices, just looking at and starting to pay attention to what makes us feel good and what makes us feel not so good, and trying to, reallocate our time to things that make us feel good versus things that don't. Again, small things like what kind of music makes you feel happy. What can make this a 5-star moment is one of the things that my best friend says all the time. And sometimes it's just like lip gloss can make it a better moment. And putting together a self-care list and trying to use that list when you're not feeling great can be a tremendous and super easy tool. Even if you just have it in your head, stuff that you can do to make yourself feel better and taking exceptional care of yourself. Because as I believe I've demonstrated, women are, taking on the bulk of the workload and are extremely valuable, just from an economic perspective, and never mind a health and a value as humans perspective. And if we are not doing well ourselves, we can't take care of anything else. So again, prioritizing and taking good care of ourselves. The second last principle here is embracing the healing journey. And I just want to mention that it can be really difficult to understand some of these facts, especially around, for example, beauty labor, and then realize that, maybe you enjoy doing your hair. And living in a culture that undervalues women and has normalized harassment and violence towards women can be an incredibly difficult thing to swallow, and something very, very difficult to accept. And a lot of us would rather not embrace these statistics, and actually instead what we tend to do is be in denial and blame ourselves. So it can be incredibly difficult to live in this society. It can be incredibly difficult to understand that this is the reality and these are the facts. And then it can be difficult to go through the healing journey to address any mental health aspects that have occurred, whether it looks like dealing with PTSD, dealing with trauma, dealing with the effects of abuse, dealing with the effects of harassment, even dealing with being underpaid is, it's some work. And not every day is going to be a good day. And not every day is going to be a day that you're necessarily going to be happy with yourself. But again, I would say, embrace the fact that it's, some days are good, some days are bad, and just be gentle with yourself, and, know that you're not perfect. That mindset shift has really, really helped me in terms of being able to understand that this is going to be, it's going to take a lifetime to undo some of the damage that has occurred, and being gentle with myself is a far better approach than if I was not gentle with myself. So yeah, just reducing your expectations, I think, is really, really helpful. One quote I really love that I think illustrates this very well is there's this really funny video on YouTube by a YouTuber called Sailor J. And she's doing this video on contouring, which is putting makeup on, like light makeup and dark makeup, to sort of make your face look a particular way. And the quote is, and this is it's a funny video, so it's a comedy, but she says, "If the men find out that we can shape shift, they're going to tell the church. Beautiful women don't have foreheads. If you have too big of a brain, it means you have ugly things like opinions and thoughts of your own." And I laughed so hard when she said that. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. And it's because, there is a grain of truth to this. There was a lot of damage done to our gender through the church, and through, a lot of violence that's ongoing in the world. And so just understanding that, it's a very grave situation that we are dealing with, even though it looks like everything's fine and feminism has done its job and equality is here. That's not necessarily true. Understanding so much of the work is about unlearning what we've been taught. And then the last principle I have is telling the truth about how we're doing. So for myself, one of the most surprising pieces of my mental health journey was in that period where I was sharing photos with you around, trying to do it all and be it all, and married and 3 children and my career and everything like that. Even though everything looked really, really good on paper and on social media, I really, as I shared with you, wasn't feeling very good. But I didn't know the severity of it until I started keeping track of my feelings. And I would just put like a little sad face or a smiley face on my planner. And then one day I looked back and I saw that I had 3 weeks of sad faces. And that's when I realized, oh, I'm not doing very well. And I didn't tell anybody at that time. I wasn't ready to. I didn't necessarily feel safe in that, but at least I was telling the truth to myself. And I feel like that's a really important piece to self-care. Not all of us do have supportive networks in place. We're working to build them perhaps, or perhaps we have, social anxiety, which is exacerbated by isolation and staying here in, and being in the pandemic and having so many of our interactions occurring through technology. Whether we're journaling about things, we're, yelling in the car, sending ourselves, text messages, recording, things that, we would like to say to other people, as long as we are keeping that honest dialogue going with ourselves about how we're doing, and then making sure that we are taking the steps that we need to get help when and if we need it, to take things off our plate, to start to say no, to sort of look at what principles that we have here that can actually help in that situation, can be very, very helpful in increasing positive mental health, because we don't have that cognitive dissonance of saying, I'm fine, and then actually believing it. And there's an acronym for FINE, which is effed up, insecure, neurotic, and emotional, which I absolutely love, because people, say it all the time, I'm fine, and then, they're clearly not. So at least being honest with yourself can be really, really helpful here. Admitting it also feels really relieving. So in summary, we have learned about the 12 environmental factors that can affect your mental health. We looked at the systemic issues. We looked at the biological issues. We looked at the workload issues. We looked at 10 principles which can help to reframe our thinking and ways to feel better that don't involve doing more necessarily, unless you want to. And I want to just say that you are not alone, and that your mental health matters, and that, especially here during the pandemic, it can be really, really difficult, and just to be super gentle with yourself. And then lastly, as promised, I wanted to share again some resources for you. So again, I encourage you to share what you thought about this presentation, any feedback, what resonated with you, what you liked, what you didn't like, using the hashtag when it all stacks up. You can share it on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, basically all over the internet. You can download a copy of this PDF presentation at resurgo.co/stacks. Just put in your email address and you can get the download right away. You can follow resurgo.co on all platforms at resurgo.co, and you can follow me at Laurel Stark as well. And that's it. So I believe I'm done a tiny bit early. So Jessica, I just wanted to ask if you could please advise any questions that have been put through in the chat. And now we've got a couple minutes for FAQs. If anybody has any questions, comments, I'd love to hear from you.
And Laurel, this is Christina. Actually, I had to step in for Jessica. She had a fire alarm, so
great. Hi,
she had
Christina.
to step out. I've noted some of the questions that have come. First of all, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story, but also these great tips. I think for us as women, it's things that we don't hear enough. So it's great to hear this as well and learn from it. The first question, you somewhat answered it in the sense of sharing these links. And I did want to let everyone know also, this recording will also is also recorded from the BWT site, and we will be sending emails out as well. But in addition to this, there was a question not only for some quotes, but also if there's any books that you could recommend.
Oh, I love that question. Thank you so much for asking it. Yes, I have so many. So the information about the beauty labor that we do mostly came from the book called The Beauty Myth by, I think it's Naomi Klein. It's Naomi someone. Anyway, it's absolutely fantastic. It's quite thick, but yeah, that's The Beauty Myth. Another one called Shrill by Lindy West is, if you don't know Lindy West, she's got a series on Hulu right now. And it goes through her journey as basically a female reporter and what she sort of had to go through in terms of harassment and things like that. But she does it in a really, really funny way. And also what it's like to be a woman in a larger body, and just how much she had to go through in order to just live her life and do her job. Definitely would recommend that book. Another one is The Woman's Book of Life by Joan Borysenko. And again, that goes through the physiological and physical sort of changes that we can expect. I haven't read it yet, but it's on my wish list, is The Vagina Bible. And it is by a doctor, a female doctor. And again, just kind of digging into, what to expect when you're expecting, but, it's like an owner's guide. And again, because there's so little research done on the female body, this particular doctor realized that, we needed to solve for that and created the Vagina Bible, which would be great. I really also, let me see, what other books do I recommend here? I think those are it for now. Yeah. And well, one more book of poetry, which is really great, is called Bone by Yrsa Daly Ward. That one's great. It's just really raw and honest. If you haven't read The Body Is Not an Apology, please do. Fantastic. It's anti-diet culture and absolutely fantastic. And would definitely recommend that. I think that's it. Yeah.
Okay. No, that's a great list. I think it may sound all very interesting, and some of those I haven't heard of. So I am looking forward to reading those myself.
Oh, fantastic.
The next question is estrogen based on birth control only as opposed to progesterone?
Is estrogen based on birth control only as opposed to progesterone? Honestly, I don't know. I know that for myself, like using that tracker app, that it says like, oh, your estrogen is up and your progesterone's down, but I never really pay attention to what's happening in which cycle. I think hormonal birth control gives you more estrogen so that your body thinks it's pregnant, and that's why you don't conceive. I think that's what's happening. But I would ask someone, or maybe Google, about that. I'm sorry, I don't feel comfortable answering it. That was just a guess. So yeah, I'm not actually sure.
No,
I should know though. I should look. Thanks for the question. I'm going to find out. Yeah.
That's great. Okay. And the next question is, how do you use, or can you use, the Flow app if you don't get a flow? And the example was like if you had a hysterectomy.
I don't know. How would you use the flow back if you don't have a flow? I don't think you can. I would look at, one thing that's been really helpful for me is to actually get a naturopath, because I've gone to my white male doctor and expressed concern around my cycle and how to sort of manage things better. And I've been summarily dismissed. So I went to a female naturopath and I found that they had a lot of fantastic suggestions for me and have helped me with managing my hormones in a way that's been really beneficial for my own mental health. Because yeah, I noticed, because I was tracking, I was like, oh, everything's like weird. It's not, this isn't my period. It just kept getting shorter and shorter. And I was like, why is this happening every 3 weeks? This is horrible. So I went and they gave me supplements and things and fixed me all up. So I had a really positive experience. I'd recommend, checking out a naturopath if you need some help in that area.
Okay, great. And actually someone, I'm just noticing in chat, someone's clarifying my first question. I might have asked it incorrectly. And they're saying that they were actually asking about if birth control statistics shared was for estrogen-based BC or progesterone. I'm struggling with the name based.
Progesterone, yeah. It's for hormonal based. So whatever hormones are in that birth control. And you know what? Let me see if I can get I would have to refer you to our research document, The State of Female Entrepreneur Mental Health, which you can get at researcher.co/stacks. So that's where you can get a copy of this PDF as well as the source documents. And the research report is broken up into 3 sections. The first is obstacles in the way of entrepreneurs. The second is obstacles in the way of women. And that's where you're going to find that piece on what studies. And you can get a link to the actual study itself and then go and look.
Okay.
Yeah. I wasn't able to do like an in-depth look at every single study. More, I was looking at what are the impacts as opposed to what are the inputs. And then the other author was able to go in and sort of provide, as she's a therapeutic professional, and provide supervision and ensure that the research was accurate. But offhand, I don't know. I apologize.
Okay. Great. No, thank you. And this is the last question I have, unless there's any more in the chat coming in the way, but it's, you've done a lot of research and collected a lot of data. What is your next journey?
Ooh, well, thank you very much for asking. So the reason that we created all of this data specifically was to take the first step, which is identifying what the problem is. And so as CEO of Resurgo, what our mission is to help self-employed women succeed and basically create a tool that I wish I had, back in the day when I had red hair and a lot more mental health problems. So the next step for me is we're currently developing Resurgo, which is the very first web app ever developed specifically to support self-employed women to succeed. So the problem that I noticed when I was doing this research is that there's a lot of support for mental health kind of over here. There's no support specifically for entrepreneurial mental health. And there is support for business owners over here, but they don't sort of, they're siloed. So if you have, and what I noticed for myself is my mental health affects my performance as a business owner because I am my business. So Resurgo seeks to create a solution that supports the entire woman, because for us, business is personal. So we are in the middle of creating and launching that app. We're looking at launching it late spring, early summer, and basically bringing that to the marketplace. Our aim is to roll that out to 1 million self-employed women by 2030. We are actively looking for investment, which is challenging. Only less than 5% of venture capital funding goes to female founders, which is just another, statistic to show the gender bias that's in place. So looking to get funding, get the app out there, get it in the hands of as many women as possible. And really excited about that. There's a lot of games in there. And again, we're looking to make it not ways that you can improve, but basically something that's gonna be fun, enjoyable, practical, affordable, and always available in the palm of your hand.
Wow, that sounds very exciting. Exciting. Looking forward to it.
Thank you so much.
And we do have one more question. It says, I don't think you, and this is coming from Stacy, I don't think you mentioned the post of therapy. I'm on a personal mission to take the stigma away from therapy by talking about it in the mainstream conversation. Do you have any thoughts on the stigma of therapy and the power of therapy?
Yeah, I'm a huge fan of therapy. I am a huge fan of therapy. It's certainly helped me out. Personally, for me, EMDR was really, really effective. And that's eye motion something. But basically, it's this tool that's utilized or started off in helping war veterans process trauma. And what I love is you don't have to talk. You don't have to tell them like, back in the day, my mom did this and she made me blah, blah. Nothing. You don't have to talk. And then it just processes the trauma and basically addresses the core belief that you have associated with that memory, and then installs a better belief. So like, I'm not good enough to I'm amazing, I can do anything. So I think it's fantastic. It's really, really helped me in my life. And I think that the only reason I didn't bring it up in this specific talk is, again, I'm very aware that women are under-resourced. We already have way too much to do. We've got so many things pulling on us, both financially and time-wise, that I didn't want to give people a big list of hey, because you know what, therapy is $150 per session, or $125, $175. And so for some people, it's not accessible. I know that some governments and employers are rolling out programs to make it more accessible. We are looking, that's one of our missions with Resurgo, to provide it to be accessible. I think the stigma is very much generational. I don't know about you, but millennials and anyone below, they'll talk about their therapist all the time. I'm an elder millennial, so I'm on the cusp, but, and then I think people older than that definitely have a stigma associated with it. So I think it's really, really interesting just looking at the I think that my generation is the first one that has the luxury to really look at our mental health, because the generations previously are dealing with war and poverty and trauma associated with all that stuff. So I think that the stigma sort of stops with us because, we've got our basics kind of covered. But for anyone thinking that, they shouldn't seek help, I would absolutely say you should seek help in whatever way you can get it. And therapy, yeah, I can't recommend it enough, honestly.
Yeah. And I think that's a great point about generational as well, and how it is changing. So
yeah,
that's great too.
Yeah. And, and if you can't afford therapy, even peer support, that's why I was saying, have a good community, because, being able to talk to somebody who gets it is so healing. And sometimes, most of the time, we just need to be heard and validated. Yeah, it sucks what you're going through, I'd be upset too, kind of thing. So, I mean, I would not overlook the value of peer support or community support either.
That's great. And that's all the questions that we've had. I don't know if you've got any closing comments, or we can close off the session.
I would just like to thank every single woman who's taken the time to be here today. I find that, in this world of competing priorities and in this world of COVID, it can be really, really difficult to carve out a little bit of time for ourselves. And so just thank you so much. And congratulations for doing that today. I hope that you found something in this talk valuable. I would love if you took home this PDF document and kind of looked at what of the systemic and environmental factors have affected you, if at all, and kind of just sit with yourself and see, where this resonates, because that'll help you create a self-care plan. Again, the self-care plan, just a list of things that make you feel better, mint tea, BC Boys, and lip gloss. And I'm doing way better. So it can be cheap and easy, but I think it's interesting. We have, we have pets and children and plants, and we go away and we say this is how you take care of this thing, but we don't have these lists for ourselves. And I think that that's something I would really encourage every woman to do, is to have a manual. Laurel needs, a lot of water every day, or she gets wrinkly and cranky and she gets stomach cramps, things like that. And just, make sure she has vegetables every once in a while. And like, I know that stuff sounds really basic, but when you really dig into it, it can be a powerful and like really affordable tool to help you feel better. And I think, the more that we can pay attention to our mental health and really take good care of it as much as we pay attention to our physical health, the better off we will all be. That's all really. And I just wanted to thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor. Thank you everybody so much for your time.